Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, stories, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out the articles, videos, and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, join the community forum, and of course, attend the weekly online Global Passive House Happy Hour. Now, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zack coming to you from Seattle in the United States.
Greetings, Zack. Good to talk to you today. We are recording, for me, it's the 21st of January, but of course that means it's the 20th of January for you. Exciting times.
Yeah, absolutely. Very exciting times. It feels like a new day. President Biden will be signing.
It's got a nice ring to it.
Yeah, it does have a nice ring to it. I have to say, he'll be signing 15 executive orders today, including orders around climate action, and will be rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement today. So that is super exciting. And we also now are seeing coming to kind of grips, I guess, in a positive way about the implications for a democratically controlled presidency and Senate and House in terms of the ability to actually deliver on climate goals and spending around this whole concept of Build Back Better. So green investment and climate action investment as we try to dig ourselves out of this economic hole that the pandemic has helped dig. So regardless of your politics, if you care about climate, this is a good day.
Climate and people as well. We all know the vast benefits of building better, and whether it's Passive House or whether it's just thinking about the way we do things. And not to dwell on the topic too much, but I just want to also highlight the fact that, as we've been discussing before we were recording, I strongly believe that federal change, big governmental change, policies anywhere around the world don't really happen until our elected leaders have the confidence to implement the changes that they think will be palatable. And that all starts at the ground level. And that's where things like Passive House Accelerator and all the people that have come before the Accelerator have been so influential in making it easy for politicians to make these decisions because of the groundwork that is being laid. So I take my hat off and give credit to all the people that have been quietly doing some really great work in the background and continue to do really great work, building, designing, and just creating better places to show the benefits that it can have for everyone.
Yeah, polling shows that climate, support for climate action and recognition that climate change is a big problem, are both increasing. That said, it still can be polarizing for some. And what is not polarizing are things like clean energy and solar power and wind energy. As long as
healthy indoor air quality.
And then buildings, exactly.
Buildings
better
that don't
buildings.
make you sick.
Yeah, right. Better buildings. This is not a political question. So there's so much I think common ground that we can build around this transition toward high performance buildings. It's just better. It's just a better way to build. So regardless of whether your first priority is climate action or whether your first priority is keeping your family healthy and safe inside your house. So,
and not just your family, but your community as well. And that's something
absolutely.
that I'm really thinking about a lot at the moment, is how good buildings can be good for everyone, and particularly passive house. Passive house can be the solution to building better communities and providing great social housing. And that's something that we touch on in this interview today, which is a fantastic interview with a fantastic guest. Do you want to give us an introduction for Dennis?
Absolutely, and just props for a brilliant segue there. That was beautifully done. Yeah, so I'm really excited to share this interview. This is an interview with Dennis Wedlick. And Dennis is the founder of BarlisWedlick Architects in New York. It's a firm he originally founded as Dennis Wedlick Architect in 1992. So he's been at this for a while. He's also really active in the AIA and the Custom Residential Architects Network, or CRAN, of AIA New York. He began his architectural career with a 12-year apprenticeship to the master architect, Philip Johnson. And during his time in Johnson's office, he worked on urban and ex-urban development projects and spearheaded the compilation of a big archive of Johnson's residential design. Today, he's best known for his award-winning residential designs, but he's also distinguished himself in master planning, landscape design, and environmental conservation. And he will allude to this in the interview. He's made a personal pivot toward the themes that you were just talking about in terms of delivering better buildings to all people and tackling some social justice issues around that, economic justice issues. So I got into some of his accolades at the top of my conversation with him, so I won't repeat them now. You're about to hear them, but suffice it to say that he's an accomplished architect and architectural thinker. He's the author of 5 books on residential design, most recently Classic and Modern Signature Styles, that he co-authored with his business partner, Alan Barlis. He's also a pioneer in passive house design in the United States, and he's been diving into the role of passive house design and construction in tackling energy poverty. So we talk about that and more in our conversation. Please enjoy. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for being part of the Passive House podcast. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you. I'm a big admirer of your work as I've gotten to know you over the last few weeks as we've been preparing for this big event that we'll talk about a little bit later in the podcast. And you are founder of BarlisWedlick Architects. You're also a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. You're the recipient of a bunch of design awards. Your work has been featured by the Smithsonian National Design Museum. And in honoring your work, Habitat for Humanity in Columbia County, New York, called you a visionary whose designs concern not only the health and welfare of his clients, but the community at large. You interned for 12 years under the master architect, Philip Johnson, who is famous for many works, including The Glass House, a masterpiece of modernism, and incidentally, perhaps as far from passive house performance as one can get. So that's pretty interesting. Now you're a passive house pioneer, among many other things. Tell us about this journey. Tell us about your journey to passive house.
Well, first I want to thank you for inviting me to speak with you and how enthused I am about our passive house community and the work that you guys are doing. It's really awesome. My journey began around late 2007, early 2008. The stock market crashed, and we had, at the time, we had a commission to design a kind of green community, and within that green community, we had the commission to design a LEED Platinum type house for that community. That was put on hold when the crash came. And we had this idea that we would turn that project as, a kind of case study project, just to keep the staff busy as we hoped to ride out the slowdown. And my partner, Alan Barlis, actually, I think it was Alan Barlis's wife, Susan, suggested oh, maybe we should look into passive house, because it was just recently, I think, published, an article just recently published in the New York Times. And I thought that was a really terrific idea. And I thought what we had was a unique opportunity, because we had already fully designed what we thought was a super high performing case study project. And said, like, to do this, we should do it as a kind of apples to apples comparison, not change that design at all if possible, and meet those passive house standards, because we knew we had a high performing design. Or we thought we had a high performing design, I should say. So we started, and I went to classes with Katrine on this, and New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. We learned about a high performance challenge program they had. So they provide us with the building science team, the Levy partnership, to kind of give us a third party kind of check to see if the metrics that we were going to be looking into were, valid. And we completed the project, and we then built the project. We built the passive house version of the project, and we had an apples to apple case study, because we could do the thermal modeling for the LEED Platinum version that we had originally, solar passive design, and then we could do the thermal modeling for the passive house version, and then we could do the for the house that we built. And it was mind-blowing. I mean, the passive house version was 99% more energy efficient, 99, not 90, 99% more energy efficient for heating, 86% more energy efficient for cooling, 76 total energy reduction compared to the original design, based on both the thermal modeling. So it was mind blowing. But I think what was most transformative about that whole experience was it connected me with people in my industry in such a different way than ever before. Because as anybody who works with passive house knows, your relationships to contractors and consultants change. We're working together on a language that is equally dependent on each of us, that depends on the craft as well as the design, and the rewards are shared equally, because the architect couldn't do it himself, the contractor couldn't do it themselves, consultant couldn't do it, and it's not arbitrary. It's metrics. It's science, So that just gave me that kind of connectivity that I always wanted to achieve in architecture. I've always been focused on that kind of human connectivity between architects and clients is what I was primarily focused on. And it allowed me to move that action into that connectivity between myself, my consultants, the builders, my team. And it was super gratifying. And that's what I love about passive house.
That's great. So last night you shared this kind of construct or understanding of passive house that I had not heard before, which I think is really interesting. I'd love you to share it with the listeners. And that is this notion of passive house as a metaphorical house for a community of practitioners who share a common goal. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, for as long as I've been working on passive house projects, and I have shied away from thinking about passive house as a kind of description of myself or my practice. and that is because I'm not a rules kind of guy. I actually don't like the idea that the art of our industry, and even the science, is limited by a set of rules. And I don't want people to use rules in my relationships as a crutch, why we can do something or why we can't do something. But on the other hand, Passive House as a community of people who are striving to create improvements in the built environment that have the minimal impact on the natural environment, that sign me up. That I'm in part of that army. So a kind of house of architects who have the same kind. Yes, you want to give me a shirt that says Passive House, I will wear it proudly. That's why I always liked the original German Passive House, the way that was spelt, better than the Americanized version that we've been using. Because to me, it reminds me much more of Bauhaus, And so many ways, Bauhaus is similar to Passive House. Same objective of taking art and science and emphasizing the same importance of craft and design. And Bauhaus has this reputation of being, stylistically minimal, the glass house.
Mm-hmm.
But originally it wasn't that, Bauhaus was about, arts and crafts and machinery, art and craft of machinery, which so many things in common with what we are working with Passive House, and also the connectivity to nature. But what we now know is that connectivity to nature has, it's really important to focus on performance with regard to, the energy used with regard to many other things. So we have a take on that connectivity, not just this kind of viewing of nature, like the glass house, since you brought up the glass house.
Right.
But other than that, it's very much like it. And I think that architecture critics and journalists, they don't like Passive House because passive, starts with a P and house starts with an H, because they don't understand how you would have that term thing that applies generally to the field. I think architects would embrace Passive House if they saw it more like Bauhaus. The idea that it's a movement that with a community of architects that think alike, and that's where I think the head should be at. And I would like very much to try to present the work that we do and to present the work that I do along those lines. Not focus too much on the rules, entirely focus on the metrics, entirely focus on the goals.
Yeah, that's a really interesting parallel that you're drawing with Bauhaus and the machine. One of the things that I feel like one of the insights that Passive House brings is that the building itself is a technology. So we're optimizing the building to drive down energy use, and therefore it's situated in the larger clean energy transition, which has learning curves and where practitioners can share innovation based on their experience, and so I think that's a really interesting connection with Bauhaus. And then there's this twist that when you understand the building as technology, or you could say as a machine, that the use of energy intensive machinery inside the building decreases. So it's like I think in some way there's this great 99% invisible episode about mechanical, modernism and mechanical equipment. I don't know if you've listened to it. And
No,
this idea that this movement that you're describing of passive house, or I mean, they don't call out passive house in the episode, but we are part of a movement potentially of kind of reclaiming responsibility for that performance. And it's a little bit of, from an architect's point of view, there's more, it's kind of a little bit of like, maybe during the argument is that during modernism, there was a little bit of a ceding of authority of the performance of buildings to mechanical engineers, because suddenly we could make that was possible with new machines. But now because we know we need to use fewer resources, that architects are in a position to reclaim some of that responsibility. And the passive house is one of those kind of ways to do that. So
yeah, and also we're more evidence-based. I mean, I think that architects and engineers are far more evidence-based than they used to be. And I think that which is, I think, why builders do not feel so isolated from the conversation, because builders are evidence-based. And if you design a house and a builder puts in a window and it's slightly different than your specifications, and you're arguing that the window has to be replaced, and the builder says, I don't understand, it's the same amount of light, it's the same amount of air, it's practically the same size, the same proportions, really? I really have to replace this window? So you start to get into those, those subjective arguments about, this or that. It's quite frustrating. And then that, I think, is why builders, have not such a high opinion of architects. And actually, they don't have necessarily a high opinion of mechanical engineers too, because that equipment that was specified is making, is often not performing, the way that they intuitively thought it was supposed to perform, and maybe wasn't designed by metrics. So I think that when that starts to extend to the user, I mean, then we're home free. When the user starts to be able to is enabled to be empowered by those metrics, and then beyond the user, when you start to get building codes that can be powered by those metrics, and then beyond that, when you can start to get the investment in the building environment powered by those metrics, then you can see some real change. I mean, it's not that long ago, if I wanted to build a green home, my only option would be to, build it, test it, and hope it worked. And generally, we didn't even test it. We would just rely on the user to tell us that it was green. And what were they? Who were they to say it was green? I mean, it was definitely, they're happy with it, but we didn't have those metrics, and we would just keep going on, and it's not that long ago. We would just keep going on about how passive solar works, and and how the chimney effect and all of this, right, and without based on any metrics. I mean, and it's just that's not that long ago. I mean, there are still codes based on things that were just intuitive, not really tested, and no real metrics associated with that.
Yeah. So, one of the things that you brought up was this kind of aversion to rules, and I know that you've have talked about that in terms of also just design and the art of architecture. So, what role do you see passive house, the metrics of passive house, impinging on and on your freedom as an architect, or informing it, or what's because there's got to be some sort of relationship, perhaps tension. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no. It's not an inversion to precedence, not at all. You know, and precedents come from examples that come before you, and you know that you have an organization, you know, that like are those that are affiliated with Passive House, to provide those precedences, and then also with those precedents to provide the metrics. You know, architects, engineers, builders, they all learn from precedents, so they can see this is how that worked and this is what the result was, and then you build upon those precedents. So not at all an aversion to precedents, nor is it an aversion to clear objectives, you know, wanting, which I also admire of a Passive House. It simply is stating the amount of energy that we want to, you know, use, you know, and they don't really care if it's an all glass house, you know, as long as, you know, the energy.
You pull it off. Yeah.
You can pull it off, right? And someday, who knows, we might be able to pull it off. So that's again why I admire Passive House. No, I think that what I don't like, or I suggest, is that we try to be clear that these aren't rules, but rather these are precedents. And then we have metrics that go with these precedents, encourage people to, you know, to avoid rules. Example, if we made a rule that the only amount of glass you could have is 10% of the facade, that would would kill architecture.
Right.
That'd be the end of it, you know.
Right.
But that could happen. I mean, that could be the way Passive House, you know, lays things out. You only have 10%, you know. But that isn't the way it's been done, and I think that that's a misnotion by people who don't know Passive House.
Right.
That they think that there are rules like that. So.
Yeah, right. There's a big difference between a performance-based tool and a prescriptive set of rules. And Passive House is definitely a performance-based, you know, set of metrics.
Yeah, exactly. And some other standards are, you know, there are some other, you know, lead like standards that give you points by rules, you know.
Yeah.
And again, that could be a dangerous prescription.
Yeah. Well said. So I want to make sure we get into your work with Habitat for Humanity and this notion of energy poverty and the role of Passive House. So just before that, can you share with the audience just a little bit of an overview of your portfolio of Passive House work, and then we can dive into that.
Right. So our firm specializes in single-family residential construction, and that's our specialty. Our client base, we say, are residential clients. It isn't that we don't do other types of projects, but generally we're a boutique firm. Generally, we work for clients who own their property. So it's a commercial project or other type of project. It's generally the client designing it for themselves, for their property. And our Passive House work began for, as I said, for a speculative developer, home builder. But then it was also a community build project, in the sense that it was, you know, the Great Recession. A lot of people needed something to be upping, and builders too. Everybody kind of participated in thinking of it. You know, we had a lot of public events, we had frame raisings, we had a lot of talks, and that actually has been the kind of that's the nature of our work. We generally do as much advocating, writing, publishing as we do designing, and that led to other homes and even small office buildings and projects like that within that area, the Hudson Valley. This is Columbia County, Hudson Valley, and quite a lot of them, actually, quite a large concentration of that work. But it also led to us working with Habitat for Humanity in that area because they were part of that original community build that I was talking about. That work we did in 2008, which became known as the Hudson Passive Project. And their volunteers are builders in the area, and they said, we could do this. We could do passive house for habitat families. And we said, okay, well, if you could do it, we can do it. And that's how that work started. And since then, I've entirely retired from designing custom homes, designing buildings, and have been shifted to the research advocacy and kind of helping communities actually pursue habitat like projects, habitat like passive house projects that we've been doing, tapping into the work that we've been doing, and helping communities even maybe modify their zoning laws, helping communities figure out maybe community trust tied to passive house standards, work like that. So that is now where my area of focus is in.
Yeah. So tell us about the role that passive house can play, in your view, in helping people rise out of poverty.
Well, yeah. So one of the things that I have learned, because in my new role, I speak to people in who write zoning laws and town laws, and I also speak to people in energy research and development authorities, and we speak at university and organizations, and we get feedback. And generally, I would hear energy is cheap. That's generally the pushback against a lot of effort, and by wrong-headed people, and that energy is cheap. And in fact, even some of my closest consultants will mouth that. But energy is cheap. In other words, if you're going to spend any amount of money to improve energy performance, what's the payback? The thing is that energy is not cheap for most Americans, because or poor, house poor, most Americans live in housing poverty, meaning that they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. And we've completely lost sight of that definition of housing poverty, but it is the definition of housing poverty. And for most Americans, food is not cheap. For most Americans, clothing is not cheap. For most Americans, internet connections are not cheap. And energy costs are, on par with those costs. And so one of the opportunities for passive house is, especially in the moderate and affordable housing end, is that because it reduces energy costs, it lifts people out of housing poverty. By moving people into higher performing homes that passive house can deliver, it lifts people out of housing poverty. But it's not just energy costs, because now we learned it's also the related costs to housing is really what keeps people in housing poverty. A lot of Americans live in single-family detached homes and cannot afford to maintain those homes, and they become substandard housing. Or they live in substandard housing. They rent, trailers, and they rent apartments in buildings that are not government-funded buildings. Government-built high-performance buildings. And so therefore, sometimes they're obligated to maintain those apartments they rent, or those trailers they rent. And there's a high cost to maintain those. Plus there's other costs related to the fact that they're in substandard. So when you move them into a high performance building, you are now launching them out of housing poverty. You are just eliminating there any risk of housing poverty? And we have clear examples of that. We have a woman, we move her into a Habitat for Humanity house. It's built to passive house standards, a trailer. She goes from, needing 6 jobs. I'm not making this up.
Wow.
She goes from needing 6 jobs to put food on the table to only needing 1 job. And then over time, she has the resources to start her own business. And so you think, well, how is that possible?
Right.
She lives in a trailer. It only costs $700 a month, but it costs $1,000 a month in energy costs over the winter because she lives in a trailer that's electrically heated.
Right.
Plus, spring, summer, fall, anything that went wrong with that trailer, she had to pay for. And when you're living on salaries that most Americans are living on, that means the choices are between, going to a dentist, putting food on the table, buying a pair of tires, or putting food on the table. Our opportunity here is more than just saving energy. Our opportunity here, when you focus on the ex-urban and the suburban communities that people live in that don't have the subsidies to build these urban passive house projects, our opportunity is to help those people by changing the way that we build homes for those people, by helping those people. And I think that is my focus. That's my primary focus. And I think that's a huge opportunity here for passive house.
Yeah, well said. So I want to make sure that we get to a little bit about the panel that's coming up on January 26th, but maybe kind of to lead into that a little bit. And this is a big question, so you can choose whatever sliver of it you want, but this is about what is your theory of change here? How can we bring more people into the passive house, this metaphorical passive house that you describe, so that we can deliver more of these kinds of projects for regular people and the people who are in poverty?
Well, I remember when I was in class with Katrine, and this is early on, right? This is her second class in the United States. And she was explaining what she, at that time, called her business model for bringing passive house to the United States, which was clear. Her intention was to educate, and through education, it would deliver assets. And I think that's admirable, and I think that it's important that each person takes their own particular situation and use it and taps into their own knowledge and skills and resources to make advances. And it should be different, I think, for each person. So for me, I live in an ex-urban community, not far from New York City, who is well known for conservation. I mean, it's it's a case study for conservation, the Hudson Valley. And what I'm trying to do is to demonstrate that we need to have conservation work for people who conserve this land. The people who are out in the field, and if you're going to keep these rural communities and you're going to conserve them, they have to be livable rural communities. And they're not sustainable because, as I said, all these people are in poverty, living in housing poverty. So my objective is to show these people, we live in a purple area, politically it's split between people that think about things differently. But pragmatically, everyone there wants things not to change in the terms of the rural character. 90% of people there want to protect their open space. In that regard, 90% of them are conservationists. So my strategy is to say conservation, building homes to conserve open space and to keep things rural, and conservation to keep people living here, the kind of people that want to live here, rural people. Conservation, leads to building better homes. And if you lead to building better homes, this is the most cost-effective way to do it, because we've done it and I've showed how we can do it, and therefore let's do it. And it's working. I mean, I'm speaking about something more than just energy. I'm speaking about something more than just protecting the environment. I'm speaking about people's pocketbooks, the pocketbooks that it matters the most to. And again, that's why I say Passive House, we have the biggest impact on that sector of our nation. And that sector of our nation lives in these types of communities. So in my mind, going after the single family residential home, helping builders see the value to it for most Americans, is the best way forward. Because I think you will then get energy research and development authorities to support it. Yes, they're supporting it for the larger structures. No, they are not supporting it for the single family home. Mm-hmm. And I think it would also help to get those suburban and ex-urban communities to start weaving it into their zoning and their local laws, and just saying, telling developers, if you want to build in our community and we want to preserve the character of our community, you need to build a higher performing building, because that's going to keep everything more cost effective for us. That's going to make it more sustainable for us. And that's going to keep our people, enable our people to still live here. So that's my strategy. I think it's a solid one. And it's so far it's leading to conversations.
Yeah. Well, consistent with that and in line with that, you have organized this panel discussion that's happening on January 26th. You've organized it for AIA New York's Custom Residential Architects Network. And it's entitled High Performance Builders Aiming for Near Zero Carbon Homes. Can you tell us a little bit about that and let audience members know why they should register?
Well, they should definitely register, because it's going to be super fun, and I know it's going to be fun because it's the way this program is being put together is that we're having 4 short films, so it's kind of like a little film festival, and each one of those short films, you're going to hear a conversation between an architect, somebody within their firm, an architect, and a builder, and everyone is different, but it's all StoryCorps-like conversations, like you hear on NPR. And you're going to hear what makes it unique for them to pursue Passive House, why they're passionate about it, why they're going to do another one and another one and another one, what maybe had gone wrong along the way, which we all need to share into it, because we all know, you're going to hear, why it was transformative for them. You're going to hear why their clients like it, and you're going to see what it is that they did that made it so exciting for them. It's not like your typical Passive House lecture, mm-hmm. And I think that's why people really enjoy it, and they're gonna relate. It's very relatable to these stories that they're going to hear, and then afterwards they're going to have the opportunity to ask questions of these people. And I'm just busting out. It's going to be the best program that American Institute of Architects New York has ever put together. Mm-hmm. And Zack, you are going to be moderating it, and you are amazing. And so, yeah. I mean, they should never think about doing anything else that night except joining this program.
That's right. January 26th. Be there. I've seen the video, the movies. They're awesome. They're fantastic. It's going to be great. Thank you. Well, I know that you're busy. I don't want to take up any more of your time. Again, Dennis, thank you so much for this conversation. It's super, super interesting. Your insights are are both unique and deep, and it's a privilege to be able to share them with the Passive House podcast audience. So thank you.
Well, it's a privilege to be a member of the Passive House community.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, welcome back. So that was our conversation with Dennis Wedlick. Matthew, what are your thoughts?
Such a great interview. Really, really awesome person to get on the show. And I just want to do a reminder for people to register for that upcoming panel. That's going to be fantastic. There's a lot to dig into here. I really enjoyed the conversation, but I guess one of the main things for me is right from the start, Dennis getting trained as a fairly traditional architect, and even the books you mentioned that he's authored before the interview, classic design, and these are sort of things that sometimes I question the relevance today of things like preserving some of the design or the so-called heritage. And don't get me wrong, heritage, beautiful buildings will stay beautiful, but I sometimes think that we retain older styles, or we glorify big glass boxes, and that can get in the way of really good, energy efficient and healthy design. So Dennis has been through that. He's been through the whole journey of being this 12 years as a into
yeah
that seems like a lot. That's like a Renaissance style kind of master apprentice type of learning, and who's got time for that sort of thing these days. But fantastic to have someone who's come from that quite traditional background, been tripped up, as a lot of people were, by everything kind of falling apart at around 2008, and pivoting from that point, saying, how can I do things differently? Coming out through the whole green building side of things, and then discovering Passive House somewhere along the line, right through to today, where he's really dedicating himself to social housing and addressing what he calls housing poverty, which is just such a great thing to. It's sad that we need to have that big focus, but great that we have people like Dennis who are focused on it.
Right, both housing poverty and energy poverty, which is such an important piece of housing poverty. Yeah, and we were just talking earlier today before our interview here about the impact that the Great Recession had on so many people, and at least in North America and probably elsewhere, the way that disruption provided space for people to discover Passive House. And for Dennis, that story about being in the midst of a project, looking at LEED, and then then finding Passive House and bringing the digital and kind of knowledge tools of Passive House to that project, and realizing what a phenomenal improvement in energy performance Passive House would bring.
99%.
I mean, that's just bonkers.
That is so, and wasn't the project shelved? Wasn't it? It had sort of got parked anyway, and
right.
I just thought, let's just do it. Let's just do it as a training exercise.
Right. Again, it's right. The recession did this, right? It was this pause, and people had this moment to kind of re-examine things, and you're right. And I think that was a theme that really came through in the interview, was just, the power of metrics, and just let's look at the numbers. Let's measure the performance to see what's going on. And not only, I think that he was drawn not only to the proof in the numbers in terms of performance, but also this idea that it wasn't it's not a prescriptive checklist that is going to hem in designers, but instead is this performance-based set of metrics that and tools to help achieve those metrics. But there are different ways to get there. So he basically said that Passive House doesn't have rules, which is contrary to what a lot of people think.
that it's very rigid. And he said, well, actually, no, it's performance. The performance metrics that you have to meet are rigid, but you have infinite flexibility on how to get there. And therefore, as an architect with a creative desire to have input into projects, there's a lot of scope there to take what's good from previous projects, but also to have your own input into these projects and make products beautiful, make them your own, and still achieve, as he says, mind-blowing results, which he was quite blown away by when he did the analysis of that. The other thing that I take out from that is to make the most of the opportunities that present themselves, even if they don't maybe seem like opportunities at the time. It would have been very easy for, and I know that a lot of people did really struggle through that time and maybe had to look for work elsewhere or sort of get down about the fact that there just wasn't much happening. Instead, he made it as a training exercise and said, well, let's just play with this, let's figure out what would this look like. And ultimately it actually ended up getting built. So really important lesson there is to make use of the opportunities however they present themselves. And I think right now, this point in time, there's huge opportunities out there for doing similar things. Now it's so much more easy to get educated wherever you are, to go along to Passive House training, to do one of those internships, maybe a little bit long, a little bit shorter.
Not 12 years.
To do it 12 years, but find yourself an experienced Passive House designer to be your mentor or connect with online. There's just so many great opportunities for anyone in the field to take up and run with it and become more inspired to create great buildings.
Yeah, you're right. There is so much to unpack here. So when you were just speaking about that, there's that metaphor that he uses about Passive House being about this community. I thought that was a nice kind of fresh perspective on the term Passive House, that we've got this metaphorical house that these different practitioners from different walks of life and different training and different, the architects and builders and engineers and others coming together around this common purpose to create better buildings that are healthy and that eliminate energy poverty and are great, are also an answer to climate change. And you're so right that I think that's one of the things that's really developed since the day that he started, back 12 years ago when the recession was hitting hard, is that house in different places around the world has really developed. And we have and because of COVID, now it's become, it's supercharged into this global community because we have these virtual tools and online only trainings now that are being released by all these different Passive House organizations around the world. So there is so much more kind of this wealth of information and tools that we have at our fingertips now.
I mean, of course, I started thinking about the global happy hour and the community that has created just in the last year and a bit now of the Passive House Accelerator has been a huge part of that growth in the global community. Of course, there are lots of other avenues as well, but that is definitely going from strength to strength, and I think really latched onto something, particularly during the crazy year of 2020. And people got more used to and appreciative of meeting online. But so, lots in there. I think we should probably talk about some of those opportunities that are coming up and more immediately, because there are a lot of them and it continues to grow. And I just, before you get into the notices, just another shout out from me personally for people to connect, not just from within America as well. I often tune in to the Technical Tuesdays which happens on a Wednesday for me because I'm here in New Zealand. But it's great to see faces from my hemisphere and from all around the world. They truly are global happy hour. So I do encourage listeners, wherever you are, to check out. Unfortunately, if you're in mid-Europe, it's not ideal timing always for the happy hour, but definitely get engaged. There's lots of opportunity to be part of the Passive House Accelerator Network.
Indeed. Yes, please join us. Please join us. So, we do have lots of stuff coming up, both at the accelerator and then by other Passive House organizations around the world. So this coming week, we will have a Construction Tech Tuesday, which is Wednesday in New Zealand and Australia, that will be focused on fluid applied weather resistant barriers that Kevin Brennan will be hosting as part of Construction Tech Tuesday. So please join us for that. And then we have Deborah Moelis from Handle Architects. And so she is one of the key designers of some of the biggest passive house projects in North America. And she'll be talking about a project at the University of Toronto, Scarborough, which we've actually had presented to the happy hour by Maureen Sanchez before, but this is going to be a new take on it. Deborah will talk a little bit about the architecture of the project, and then she's going to be talking about the process of convincing the university to go for Passive House. So this, I think, will be a really interesting sort of communications and marketing psychology kind of presentation as well. So that should be great. On January 26th, we have the AIA New York CRAN panel that Dennis has organized, and that I have the great honor of moderating, that we discussed in the intro and during the interview. So we'll share information about that in show notes, but please join us for that combination of film festival and panel discussion. And boy, there's more, and we'll do a bunch of stuff in show notes, but we've got great stuff coming up. There's in terms of education resources from FIAS, from NAPHN, from Building Energy Exchange, from PHI, from AIA New York. I mean, just a whole bunch of Passive House Canada, Australian Passive House Association. So we'll share all that information in show notes with folks so you can access that. But, we had a little lull during the holidays, and now 2021 has begun, and there's a wealth of opportunity.
I think I also saw that aren't submissions open now for abstracts for the International Passive House Conference?
They are indeed. I believe that the deadline for that is February 15th.
Coming up, yeah. So if you're wanting to get involved with that, now is the time to think about submitting an abstract to these great conferences that are coming up. And I'm imagining that there'll be a combination of in-person and online events for this year.
Yeah, and that conference will be in Wuppertal probably in Germany in September. So, yeah,
awesome. Hey, well, great chatting with you, and also thanks for organising that awesome interview with Dennis this week, Zack.
My pleasure. That was a lot of fun. Thank you, Matthew.
And we will be back again on the Passive House podcast next week. Thank you very much for tuning in.
All of the work of Passive House Accelerator, including the Passive House podcast, would be impossible without the support of our sponsors. So we want to take a moment to give a hearty thank you to our sponsors. Our founding sponsors are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxter Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minotaur, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, RDH Building Science, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thank you.